Shalom, my dear friends, shalom, and welcome back to our studies after the Pesach break. Today, a very good day to pick up our studies again. Today, the first day of the new month of Iyar, Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the 16th day of the Omer count, with our eyes now particularly to the 33rd day, which will be Lag BaOmer. Already we are just about 1/3 of the way through the count, and we have a good way to go and a lot of work to do. And the month of Iyar is particularly auspicious for the study of Torah, since Israel went out of Egypt to a freedom from the servitude to the Egyptians that carried with it now the responsibility of the service of God according to the Torah. And the period of the Omer count is a period of introspection and of self-development, and particularly auspicious for the study of the Torah. The month of Iyar is connected with the tribe of Yisachar, which had many, many outstandingly wise sages that knew the secrets of astronomy and astrology and many other areas of Torah wisdom. Well, I have notified people on our Kollel mailing list about a change of format since the format that we had before the festival of Pesach, and since my own time now is under particular pressure owing to this being the year of mourning for my late mother, Aleha Shalom, and I'm leading the prayers in the synagogue 3 times every weekday and undertaking special studies besides my regular work, so I have been forced to limit our teaching sessions to 3 a week, of which, with the help of God, in the coming months, the Sunday sessions will be in the format of Shavuot Tov, devoted to discussion of the weekly Torah portion and of any coming days of note in the Torah calendar, and any particular important and relevant subjects, particularly in relation to what is going on in the wider world around us, which certainly in our times, with so much going on, calls for comment. So that will be the Sunday time frame, and that will be at 1600 hours Israel time, with corresponding times elsewhere across the world, as will be marked in the schedule, and also a 1600 hours Israel time format for our Monday and Thursday Torah Kollel, in which we will be looking at the Tanakh and also looking at the teachings of Rabbi Nachman and his disciple Rabbi Nason in Likutey Moharan and Likutey Halachot. I feel that it is important for us at this juncture to press on with our studies of the Nevi'im, the prophets, and although I would have liked, had circumstances permitted, to be able to continue with our detailed halachic studies, I think that for some this was somewhat beyond the level where they need to be at the moment, whereas the inspiration that we can derive from Rabbi Nachman and the wisdom we can derive from Rabbi Nachman is something that applies to everybody. So those will be the focuses of our hookups on Mondays and Thursdays with the help of God at 1600 hours Israel time for 1 hour and a half until 1730 Israel time on Tanakh and teachings of Rabbi Nachman and his disciple Rabbi Nosson of Breslov in Likutey Moharan and Likutey Halachot. So with that, let us today turn to our continuing studies in the Tanakh and beginning to look at the prophet Haggai. Shalom, today, the first day of the month of Iyar of the year 5778, the 16th day of the Omer count, corresponding to the 16th day of April of the year 2018. And today we embark on the study of the prophecy of Haggai, one of the last of the prophets of the Trei Asar, the 12 shorter prophets, and stylistically one of the easiest to comprehend. The prophet Haggai does not speak in the riddles and mysteries that we find in some of the other prophets, which we found in Hosea and we found in Yoel, and we can see in others of the Trei Asar. The style is much more clear, and we have specific historical dates in the annals of the Jewish people given to us in the prophet Haggai. And in order to understand the prophecy of Haggai and how it relates to us today, it is tremendously helpful to understand the prophecy in its historical context, particularly since these prophecies are all dated and related to events that we know about from other biblical sources. And this is part of the beauty of studying the Trei Asar, that we have such a variety within the compass of a relatively short collection, as opposed to the very lengthy prophecies of Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, and Yechezkel, Ezekiel, which go to many, many chapters and demand much comment and discussion, elaboration. But here with the Trei Asar, we can move from one to the other with very different styles between them and get different kinds of inspiration from each one. And the prophecy of Haggai is particularly relevant to our time because it's a prophecy that comes specifically not from a time of destruction or imminent destruction, as in the case of the prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, all of which were said either before or during the actual destruction of the Temple of Solomon. And while some of the Trei Asar were many generations before the destruction of King Solomon's temple, the prophecies of the last three of the Trei Asar, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, are all from the period of reconstruction, the period of the Shavei Bavel, the returnees from Babylon, the returnees of the exile of Judah and Benjamin to Babylon at the prior to and at the time of the destruction of King Solomon's temple. And now parallel historical sources that throw light on Haggai are in the Bible, primarily the books of Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Haggai was a figure around whom some legend surrounds and is considered by some authorities to have lived an incredibly long time. He was one of the key members of the Torah tradition. And just to set this in the context and to understand the dating of the prophecies of Haggai, let us understand some basic principles. It was known by the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah lived through, and Ezekiel lived through the destruction of the temple and the exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. And this was prophesied elusively in Isaiah and specifically in Jeremiah, who lived through it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar did not immediately, when he ascended the throne, attempt to capture Jerusalem. The first great act of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar had been the overthrow of Nineveh and the kingdom of Assyria, which had been essentially overthrown at the time of the unsuccessful siege on Jerusalem by King Sennacherib, King Sennacherib. And at the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's ascent to power, he overthrew Nineveh and became the world emperor of the time. And already Jeremiah, living at the time of the ascent of Nebuchadnezzar to power and his destruction of the temple, prophesied that the time of Babylon would be 70 years. And these 70 years began from the ascent of Nebuchadnezzar to the throne. That was the ascendancy of Babylon, Bavel. But it was only in the 19th year of his reign that he began the destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction actually came about in the 19th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and we shall see this in all of the commentaries. Now, the temple itself was not to be rebuilt until 70 years after its destruction. That is to say that Babylon then fell after the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and his son Evil-Merodach and his son Belshazzar. Babylon fell to the joint forces of Media and Persia. 70 years from Nebuchadnezzar's ascent to the throne, but there was still another 18 years to go before 70 years would have elapsed from the destruction of the first temple, when the second temple could then be rebuilt. So now, at the time of the fall of the Babylonian Empire, the overthrow of Belshazzar by Darius the Mede, and his son-in-law Cyrus, Koresh, the king of Persia. And Darius reigned for only 1 year, and then Koresh came to the throne, and it was Koresh who took over this new Median-Persian empire, who relented against the decree against Jerusalem and gave the green light for the rebuilding of the temple. And this is recounted in the early chapters of the book of Ezra. Before Ezra himself came up to the land of Israel, Ezra remained on in Babylon while two major leaders came up, and they were Zerubbabel, who was from the royal house of King David. He was the grandson of one of the last kings of Judah, King Jechoniah, and he was together with Yehoshua or Hoshea, the high priest. And these two, Zerubbabel and Hoshea, figure in the book of Ezra and also in the prophecy of Haggai and the prophecy of Zechariah. And so we have independent sources besides Haggai himself about all that was going on at that time. And although King Koresh, Cyrus, gave the green light for the rebuilding of the temple already just 52 years after its destruction, and although Zerubbabel and Hoshea, the high priest, set the foundations of what was to become the second temple, as we see in the book of Ezra and also the book of Nehemiah, there was huge antagonism to this project by the other nations in the vicinity. These other nations had been brought in by King Sennacherib, when he was trying to overthrow Jerusalem, and when he took the 10 tribes into exile, he settled these other peoples in the land, and there was a whole motley collection of different peoples in the land of Israel and the adjacent lands who were determined not to see the temple of Jerusalem rebuilt. And among the leaders of that movement of opposition to the building of the temple, according to our sages, were the sons of Haman, the villain of the Purim story. And letters of enmity were being sent from these forces in Israel to the government of the Persian Empire. This is recounted in Ezra, challenging the legitimacy of the building of a temple in Jerusalem. And Koresh relented, and the work was put on hold. And the years in which the project was on hold consumed the remaining years of Koresh, all of the reign of his successor, Achashverosh, that is Ahasuerus of Megillat Esther, and the first years of the reign of the son of Achashverosh, that is Darius II. This is Darius of Persia, not to be confused with Darius the Mede, who with Cyrus I had overthrown the Babylonian Empire. So those 18 years from the time of Cyrus, Koresh green light for the temple, until its actual rebuilding, were filled with the remaining years of Cyrus, then the years of Ahasuerus, including the Purim miracle. And indeed, the Purim miracle was critical to the building of the Second Temple, because had Haman succeeded, God forbid, in his machinations, he would have prevented there ever being any Jewish continuity in the future. And it was because of the overthrow of Haman and the impact that this had on Persia that the way became opened to the actual execution of the building of the Second Temple. So that came 18 years after the original foundations were laid by Zerubbabel and Yehoshua the high priest. Now, the period in which Haggai's prophecies open are precisely at this time in the years of Darius, the second Darius, the king of Persia, the son of Achashverosh. And according to our sages, Darius was the son of Queen Esther Hamalka. And it was, as recounted also in the book of Ezra, in the time of Darius, that was discovered the original edict that the temple in Jerusalem could be rebuilt. And the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi came specifically to teach the people, encourage the people that now is the time to build. In other words, there had already been for 18 years a residency of Judeans and some remaining representatives of all the other tribes of Israel in Judea and the land of Israel and in Jerusalem. And they had been building, they had been farming, they had been engaged in trade and commerce, but they had fallen into a despair that the temple could ever be rebuilt again because of the antagonism of the surrounding motley gathering of peoples. And it was precisely against this despair that the prophets Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi came to actually bring Holy Spirit to the people, that the time of the rebuilding has arrived. Now, another most important character in all of this discussion is Daniel. We find in the later chapters of Daniel, among Daniel's last visions, that he was privy to the vision of the celestial court and the discussions of the angels, all by the side of a river there in their exile. And there were three men with him who did not see the angel that he saw. And according to tradition, these three that were with him were actually these three prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Even though Daniel is not considered to be a prophet, but rather a hacham, a sage who was privy to Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, prophecy is considered to be on a different level. It's the direct message of God to the people. And Daniel had done the calculations, and Daniel had understood that, in fact, only 52 years after the destruction of the temple, it was not yet ripe to be rebuilt. And Daniel knew that it would take yet more time. And so Daniel is acting in concert with these three prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and they now come to the people to tell them that the time is in fact ripe. And this is precisely what brings Haggai to the status of being so important and relevant to our times. Because indeed, since the time of the destruction of the second temple, which was being built in the time of Haggai, since that time, although there has been a continuous Jewish residency in the land of Israel, the entire period since the destruction of the temple and the Roman occupation has been considered to be a time of galut, exile. And indeed, the exile was very deep throughout practically the first millennium after the destruction of the temple. It was only in the early centuries of the second millennium that sages from a variety of different countries actually succeeded in returning to the land of Israel. Some very notable sages, the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, and the great poet Yehuda Halevi, and other sages who risked their lives and indeed in some cases sacrificed their lives to get to Israel. And the return began to accelerate, particularly with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, which led to a gathering of rabbis in the city of Sfat and an increasing Jewish residency in the land. And this accelerated in the coming centuries. Within the 18th century, both the Rabbi Eliyahu, the Gaon of Vilna, and the Baal Shem Tov encouraging their Talmidim, their students and disciples, to emigrate from Europe, from Russia to the Holy Land. And in the 19th century, there was ever increasing aliyah to the land of Israel from many different countries, east and west, to the point where we are now, this very week, celebrating the 70th year of the establishment of the independent Medinat Israel, the state of Israel, whose Hebrew Independence Day date falls this week, later in the week. And what we are seeing here is that indeed the Jews have been returning from all parts of the world and have established tremendously successful and thriving communities based upon successful agriculture, successful industry, successful business, scientific research, communications, and many other things. But what we do not see is the redemption of Jerusalem and the building of our longed-for and prophesied third temple. And this is precisely the element that is missing and precisely the element that we await. And this is what makes such a parallel between the era of Haggai and our time. Indeed, in recent months, with the undertaking of the President of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, to, after many, many years of waiting, to move the embassy of the United States to Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Many have been hailing, many including Israeli rabbis have been hailing this decision by President Trump as in the footsteps of King Koresh, Cyrus of Persia, giving the green light for the temple to be rebuilt. Well, it's a bit premature to jump to that conclusion, it seems to me, and we need to bear in mind that in the time of Koresh, it took 18 years from the original green light until the temple was actually built. But what we see in these prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi, which we do not see in most of the earlier prophets, is the green light of God Almighty to the human endeavor of constructing once again a sanctuary to his glory. And this, it seems to me, is where the prophecy of Haggai particularly, but also that of Malachi and Zechariah, why they're of such relevance in our time. So with that, let us turn to the text of Haggai, the Hebrew text. And we have the benefit of the Sefaria.org Tanakh, together with an incredible collection of other Sifrei Kodesh, which have their translations into English accompanying, available on both on computers and on phone applications, and all are now able to easily follow the text of these prophecies. The Hebrew text of Haggai chapter 1. Bishenahas shtayim ledor yovesh hamelech b'chodesh hashishi b'yom echad lachodesh hoyo devar Adonai ביד חגי הנביא אל זרובבל בן שאלתיאל פחס יהודו ואל יהושע בן יהוצדוק הכהן הגדול לאמור. Well, here we see the exact, very exact dating of this prophecy. The second year of Darius, the king of Persia, as stated, not to be confused with Darius the Mede, but now Darius considered to be the son of Queen Esther. And this is after the Purim miracle and after the death of Achashverosh. And this in the 6th month, which is the month of Elul, known to us as the month of Teshuvah, preparation for the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and the heights of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, followed by the festival of Sukkot. This is B'yom Echad LaChodesh, the very first day of the month of Elul, and this is a day known to have a tremendous spiritual significance in the Torah calendar. It's the day when Moses ascended for the third time to Sinai after pleading for Israel to be forgiven for the sin of the golden calf, and after attaining conciliation for his third ascent when he was to receive the second tablets. That occurred also on the first day of the 6th month, according to our calculations, 120 days from the giving of the Torah. So on this very auspicious day of reconciliation, that was when this word came through the hand of Haggai the prophet, and the word was directed specifically to the leaders of the people, what we might call the political leader, that is Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the Pachas, the officer or governor of Judea, and Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok, HaKohen HaGadol, the high priest. These king and high priest are the two central figures in the government of the true Torah state of Israel. Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, was the product of a miracle, as is narrated in the Talmud and in the Midrash. The last king of Judah, King Tzidkiyahu, Zedekiah, had been captured by Nebuchadnezzar at the time of the destruction of the first temple and had been blinded after witnessing all of his sons slaughtered in front of his eyes, blinded and taken into captivity, where he was held in Babylon. And Tzidkiyahu came to the throne after a short-lived king by the name of Yechoniah, who is mentioned in the beginning of Megillat Esther, prior to the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, some years earlier. That was during the 18 years from the ascent of Nebuchadnezzar to power, before he actually destroyed Jerusalem. It was some years after he came to power. He already deported Yechoniah from Jerusalem to Babylon, together with some of the leading members of the priesthood in the community. Among them were Daniel and his companions, and among them, as recounted in Megillat Esther, was Mordechai and Esther. And that was the first wave of exiles to Babylon. Now, Yechoniah was reputed to have been a tremendously evil sinner, and it was only when he was held in solitary confinement in a deep pit in Babylon that he repented. And the sages of Israel, according to the narrative in the Talmud, feared that the line of David would become extinct, and they found a way to one of the attendants of the queen mother in Babylon, and they persuaded this attendant to entreat the queen to have to request compassion from the then king of Babylon. This is after the death already of Nebuchadnezzar, but when Yechoniah had been in solitary confinement for many years, and the sages succeeded in having the queen intercede with the then king Evil-Merodach that he would permit the wife of Yechoniah to be lowered into the pit in order for them to procreate. And when his wife was lowered into the pit, at the very she was down there, and they were about to have relations when she saw that she had a menstrual stain, and she said, "I can't." And he accepted that he would not have relations with her during her menstrual period, and this was his repentance from his sins in Jerusalem of having such forbidden relations. And in the merit of his strength at this moment, they allowed her to purify and be lowered down a second time, and a child was born from that issue, and that is the child named Shealtiel, who is mentioned here as the father of Zerubbabel. So Shealtiel was the son of Yechoniah, and Zerubbabel was his son. So Zerubbabel was really the heir to the line of David. He's here called Pachas Yehuda, the governor of Yehuda, because the Yehuda is currently one province of the great Persian Empire. And with Zerubbabel, the political and strategic leader, is Yehoshua ben Yehotzadak, the spiritual leader of the people, who in himself was considered to be a tzaddik. However, as we find in the book of Ezra, Yehoshua's sons had married women that were forbidden to the priesthood, and Yehoshua had to undergo some shame and suffering, as is recounted in the prophecy of Zechariah, in order to be cleansed of this blemish. So here is the historical context of the prophecy of Haggai, and let us turn now, by way of conclusion, to the commentary of Rashi on Haggai, on this verse, where Rashi fills it in his way from our sages the information we have had so far. B'shnas Shtayim leDaryavesh, that is Daryavesh, the king of Persia, who was after Achashverosh, and we find in the Midrash Vayikra Rabbah that he was the son of Esther, and it had been in the days of the first Koresh, that is Koresh, the king that succeeded Darius the Mede, Darius being the first Koresh, his father-in-law. And let us understand that Koresh is actually a generic name of the kings of Persia, like Paro was a generic name of the kings of Egypt. So the first Koresh, the first king of Koresh of Persia, it was in his days that Zerubbabel went up with Yeshua, the high priest, from Babylon to Jerusalem with the permit of King Koresh, as it says in Ezra chapter 9, who among all of my people will go up? And however, then, as the narrative continues, there arose the enemies of Judah and Benjamin, and they sent their letters to Cyrus to instruct him to cancel the work of the building of the temple that had been started, and indeed Cyrus gave orders and stopped the work. And from that day on, the work was stopped, as we see in Ezra. Badain and Betelos Avidas Beis Elokona. It was then that the work on the house of our God ceased, and it was standing still for all of the 3 years that Koresh reigned, for the 14 years of Achashverosh, and the first year of the reign of Darius, the son of Achashverosh. And it was in the second year that this prophecy was said to Haggai to encourage them to go back to building this work and not to be afraid anymore, because now the surrounding pagans would no longer be able to stop them, because the Holy One, blessed be He, would give them success. So with that, we conclude our historical introduction to the very relevant prophecy of Haggai, and we will turn to further investigation of the text and some of the traditions surrounding the individual Haggai in our coming sessions. And with that, my friends, we'll take a break and come back shortly to our study of Likutey Moharan. And today we will be studying from the first volume of Likutey Moharan, the third teaching, Torah Gimel of Likutey Moharan, and I have referenced this teaching in the sefaria.org archive of Torah texts, and it is available with English translation before your eyes. So please do take advantage of that resource. It's available from the Watch Live class page of azamra.org under Abraham's Tent, and you will find there a direct link to the Sefaria library, to that specific page of Likutey Moharan with the English translation. And I will be back soon in just a few minutes after our interval with our studies of Chassidut. Let us now resume our studies for today, turning now to the sublime teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov in his Likutey Moharan. Shalom, today the first day of the month of Iyar of the year 5778, corresponding to the 16th of April of the year 2018, today the 16th day of the Omer count, and on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, an appropriate time to embark on the study of teachings of Rabbi Nachman, specifically relating to Malchut David, the kingship of King David, which is the essential underlying theme of this teaching in Likutey Moharan in Chelek Aleph, the volume 1 of the original Hebrew printing, the third Torah, lesson 3, particularly appropriate for the period of the Omer count, which is our preparation for the festival of Shavuot, when we celebrate the receiving of the Torah. And the receiving of the Torah at Sinai was the beginning of the great journey through history until the eventual revelation of Melech Mashiach, who will bring the entire world to serve God and reveal the kingdom of God over the whole world. And this is the concept of the Malchut Bet David, which in the amazing teaching here of Rabbi Nachman is built through melody. Indeed, we see that Rabbi Nachman, out of all the teachers of Chassidus and indeed of Musar and indeed of all of the latest teachers dating from Talmudic times and afterwards, it's Rabbi Nachman almost alone who goes deeply and profoundly into the subject of music, as he does in this coming teaching and as he does in a number of other of his teachings. Rabbi Nachman was clearly a master of melody, the melody of the Torah, and in this he was the precursor of the son of David, Melech Mashiach, David having been the Ne'im Zemirot Israel, the sweet singer of Israel. And Rabbi Nachman indeed revealed once again to the world the secrets of music and melody, which are the core of the Torah, particularly found in the esoteric Torah, in the Holy Zohar, and above all in the Tikkunei Zohar, the writings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and also in the writings of the Ari, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the 16th century Kabbalist, and all of these we shall find in this very beautiful and touching lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, Torah Gimel, Torah 3. But before we go into the actual text of the Torah, to bring us into the atmosphere of the period of Rabbi Nachman, let us follow through an account of how actually this teaching came to be said by Rabbi Nachman. I hope that we will soon have the opportunity to take a look at the introduction to Likutey Moharan by Rabbi Nachman's disciple, Rabbi Nosson of Breslov, where he explains that in the course of the Likutey Moharan, Rabbi Nachman addresses every single subject of importance in Torah and the practice of Judaism. All of the festivals, the Shabbat, the new moons, Hanukkah, Purim, all of the different attributes, many of the specific commandments and areas of the commandments all come up in this remarkable work, Likutey Moharan, all woven together in what is essentially a series of discourses, each one of which was delivered at a different time. And the very early discourses in Likutey Moharan were actually delivered by Rabbi Nachman prior to the arrival in his circle of the one that became his closest disciple, Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson was aged 22 when he came to Rabbi Nachman, then aged 30 in the year 1802. And Rabbi Nachman had only just moved into the town of Breslov. And from the time that Rabbi Nachman came close to Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman assiduously transcribed every teaching and every conversation that he heard from Rabbi Nachman in the belief that every one of them contained enduring Torah teaching and inspiration. And the teachings at the very beginning of Likutey Moharan date from just prior to the arrival of Rabbi Nachman in Rabbi Nachman's circle, shortly after Rabbi Nachman entered the town of Breslov in the year 1802, when Rabbi Nachman was aged just 30 years old. Rabbi Nachman had been born in the town of Mezhibars, the town of his great-grandfather, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and there he grew up until his marriage, when he moved to the eastern Ukraine. And it was at the age of 18 already that Rabbi Nachman began to be known as a extremely exalted sage and mystic. And by the age of his late 20s, his fame had spread when Rabbi Nachman was aged 27 in the year 1799. He made the tremendously perilous journey to the land of Israel, and reaching there from his native Ukraine was one of the things in his life that he considered his greatest achievement, to have walked in the land of Israel, even though he returned to Ukraine after his visit and became a leader first in the area of the eastern Ukraine, and then moving westwards in the year 1802 to the town of Breslov. And it was just prior to Rabbi Nachman's arrival in Breslov in the late summer, early fall of the year 1802, that on his lengthy journey from the East Ukraine to Breslov, he stopped off in a number of different places, including the town of Uman, where he later left the world and is buried. And a week after that, he was in a small town where some of his followers were before he came to the town of Breslov. And it was when he was in that town that he delivered this teaching that we shall be studying. And the account of the delivery of this teaching was a tradition of the Breslover Hasidim, which is brought down in a work called Tovas Zichronos, the Good Memories, which was compiled by Rabbi Avraham Sternherz, a leader of the Breslover Hasidim who came from Ukraine to the land of Israel in the 1930s and raised many students in Israel, and wrote fairly prolifically, bringing down traditions of the Breslover Hasidim. And he writes as follows: this teaching in Torah 3 of Likutey Moharan came about through the following sequence of events. The Rabbi was in the town of Ladizhin, or Ladishin, I can't pronounce these Ukrainian town names, but he was in that community for the Shabbat. This is just prior to his then entering Breslov a few days later. Now, in that city, there were a number of Rabbi Nachman's followers already, and many in the city already knew about the very fierce controversy which was raging around Rabbi Nachman. It had started 2 years earlier, and it was being led by one of the leading elders of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Aryeh, the elder of Shpola, the Zayda, the grandfather of the town of Shpola, who turned into a ferocious opponent of Rabbi Nachman owing to some slanders that were said to him in the year 1800. And the news of this machloket, this controversy, had traveled among the communities, and there were people in the town that knew about this. And nevertheless, when Rabbi Nachman was actually in the town, even those who were touched by his opponents were fearful of actually saying anything untoward in his presence, particularly since he had actually come to visit them, and the majority accepted the Rabbi with in a peaceable manner, with the proper respect and derech eretz, politeness and courtesy. And there were only a very few people in the town that did not want to come and be in the presence of Rabbi Nachman. Now it so happened that on that Shabbat, when Rabbi Nachman was visiting this community, one of his followers, one of Rabbi Nachman's followers, had a newborn son that week, and in the according to the custom of having a gathering in the home of the father and mother of the new baby on the Friday night, the first Shabbat after the birth of the child, prior to the circumcision. This is called the Shalom Zochor, the receiving peaceably of the new male. And the custom of Israel is that people go to gather for after the Friday night meal that people have in their own homes. They go to gather in the home where the new baby is, and they sit there around the table with various fruits and other delicacies brought before them and beverages. And it was the custom that the chazan, the cantor of the community, would have to come to the feast of the Shalom Zochor, and it was customary that he would actually come to sing some of the Shabbos songs at the gathering, and indeed this was a part of his income, because at the time of the coming circumcision, the cantor would say blessings over each and every of the people attending, and they would each one give him a monetary gift for his blessing. And since the cantor of the town was among the opponents of Rabbi Nachman, when it came to attending this Shalom Zochor, where Rabbi Nachman himself was present, this being the newborn son of one of his followers, the chazan, the cantor, pointedly sat at the far end of the table, as far away as he could from the Rebbe. Now, the custom was, as mentioned, that the chazan would have to sing some of the Shabbos songs for the assembled people, and this chazan of this town would not sing at all. And the Rabbi Nachman said to the father of the new baby that he should ask the cantor, the chazan, why doesn't he sing? Why doesn't he say one of the Shabbos songs? And the chazan replied that right now he doesn't have a voice to be able to sing. Well, Rabbi Nachman answered, and he said, I'm going to give him a voice. The Hebrew here is a little more ambiguous, because the Hebrew word kol, a voice, where the chazan said he doesn't have a voice, the word kol can also mean a rumor or an evil report. So when Rabbi Nachman said he will give this chazan a voice, he meant he's going to let people know about some flaw in the chazan. And this is not untypical of various episodes recounted in the works about the Baal Shem Tov and other cases by Rabbi Nachman and other Hasidic leaders, where they would actually expose fraudulent leaders of communities. Only here in our case, we have a most sublime Torah discourse that came out of this event, and let's follow through with the continuation. And meanwhile, there were at the table some other people that were able to sing, and they sang the songs. And when they all left the table, the Rabbi Nachman spoke about the verse in a book of Proverbs that says, one who cultivates harlots will lose a great wealth. And the sages of Israel comment on that verse that the great wealth he will lose is his voice. And the Rabbi said this in a kind of questioning way. Won't somebody who cultivates harlots lose their wealth, namely their voice? And nobody understood what he was talking about. And the following Shabbat, the Rebbe was no longer in that town. He'd already moved on to Breslev. But the following Shabbat, there was another Shalom Zochar, this time for another person in the town. Only in this case, the father of the newborn baby was very poor. And for the traditional Shalom Zochar, which was held in the humble house of this poor new father, the Chazan didn't even show up at all. And there were a number of people there who were very outraged that the Chazan would not arrive, the cantor. And the previous week, where Rabbi Nachman had been present, the father of the boy at that stage was somebody who was one of the better off members of the town, and the Chazan had no option but to attend. But now, because this week it's a poor man that is the father of a new baby, the Chazan doesn't even come, and it entered their minds that they would actually go to the house of the Chazan to call him and force him to go with them so as not to embarrass the poor man who had the newborn baby this week. Only when they arrived at the house of the Chazan, they didn't find him there in his house. And they asked his wife where he was, and she told them that he'd gone to this Shalom Zochar that they had been attending. And they found this very strange, since he'd not been present. And on a Friday night, after the Friday night meal in each person's home, where do people go? They knew that this Chazan had a particular friend, and very often he would go to visit that friend in the friend's house, and it occurred to this pair that were looking for the Chazan that maybe he had gone to see his friend that night. But they knew that the friend went traveling that week and he would not be at home that week. But even so, they went to that friend's house and they knocked on the door. And this house had 2 entrances. And nobody answered their knocking on the door. And while they were waiting outside the door, they noticed that the Chazan was fleeing from the other door of the house into the darkness. And already prior to this, some people had been muttering about some kind of something going on between this Chazan and the wife of the Chazan's friend, but they did not know for certain. But now these 2 saw with their own eyes that this was true, that the Chazan was having an affair with a married woman, which is a violation of the 7th commandment and is punishable by death, and a very serious offense and a true breach of the bris, the covenant between God and the people of Israel. So now they saw that this was true, and now went out the report in the city, the call, the voice went all over the city, and the Chazan, the cantor, had to flee that city and go far away. And now everybody in the city could testify that what Rabbi Nachman had said, that he would give this cantor a voice and a report. They could all see now what the Rabbi had meant. And in the house of the cantor's friend in that town where he used to go allegedly to see his friend, and he was actually carrying on with the friend's wife, there was a bird's nest, and the birds there were constantly chirping. And before the Chazan fell into disgrace, he always used to say that he would go there because he just loved hearing the chirping of the birds as if they were singing some melody. Now, it was on that Shabbat of the first Shalom Zocher, prior to the coming out into the open of the shame of the Chazan. It was on the previous Shabbat at the time of the Shalom Zocher when the Chazan was present but didn't want to sing, and Rabbi Nachman said he will give him a voice and a report. It was on that first Shabbat that the Rabbi, according to the Tovos Zichronos, said the teaching that we shall be studying, the teaching which is entitled Akrukis, or the frog, the singing frog. And afterwards, when the story came to light, everybody could see the Holy Spirit and prophecy that came forth from Rabbi Nachman, because the whole episode of the Chazan who became exposed, this took place after the Rebbe had already left the town of Ladizin, and through this episode and through seeing the Holy Spirit of Rabbi Nachman, practically all of the people in the city became attached to Rabbi Nachman and entered his following. Now, we find in the teaching we should be studying, Likutey Moharan, Part 1, Torah 3, that Rabbi Nachman lays down how it is possible indeed to hear melodies from anybody and not to be adversely influenced by them, and this is through the study of the oral law at nighttime, as we shall see, and we shall be investigating how all this comes out from Rabbi Nachman's teaching, because of this teaching which is brought forth in our Maimor, the discourse we shall be studying. In that very town, they instituted thereon that in all of the study halls in the city, after the evening services, there would be chavuras, there would be gatherings of people to learn Mishnah and Gemara, the oral Torah, and there was tremendous Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of the name of God, through seeing how all this repair came about through Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, and this brought about inspiration to people to learn and to teach and to guard and to observe and to practice. All this from the work Tovos Zichronos, compiled by Rabbi Avram Sternherz, based on traditions of Breslev Hasidim, about the background to the saying of this teaching of Likutey Moharan, Part 1, Lesson 3. And with that, let us now turn to the text of this teaching. And as I have mentioned, we do have online the Sefaria online library of Torah texts, and the Sefaria library not only has all of the Likutey Moharan and Likutey Halachot and other Breslever works, but also has, in many cases, English translation. And this teaching will come to explain a very recondite Agadah, a story told by the later Amorah Rabbi Bar Hana. Rabbi Bar Hana, who is mentioned many, many times in the Babylonian Talmud, and who brought down many traditions and who was a great traveler, in Tractate Baba Basra, there is on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis a whole series of such narratives by Rabbi Bar Hana. And this is one of them. There are many other phantasmagorical narratives, and they're extremely recondite and have been subject to very much commentary. According to the Breslover tradition, Rabbi Nachman said that Rabbi Bar Chana came to Rabbi Nachman in a dream and asked him why Rabbi Nachman does not come to explain and comment on Rabbi Bar Chana's narratives, and this is precisely what Rabbi Nachman does in the 15 opening teachings of Likutey Moharan. And here let us look at what he says in this teaching. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana ledidi, I myself, chazeli ahi akrukso, I saw that frog, dahavaki akro dagronio. That frog was just like Agro Dagronio, which is apparently a town, a fortress in Babylon, a large fortress. How big was this Akra Hagronia Kamahave? How big was this Akra Hagronia? Shitin Bati, well, 60 houses. Also, Tanino Bala'o, there came a serpent and swallowed up the frog. Also, Pushkansa Uvolo Zatanino, there came a raven, black raven, and swallowed up the serpent. Well, that's quite an achievement for a bird to swallow a serpent that was sufficiently large to swallow this frog that was the size of that fortress town of Akra Hagrania. And after that, the raven goes up and sits on a tree, perches herself on a tree. Come and see how mighty was the strength of that tree. A very mysterious Agadah. One thing that could be said about it perhaps at the very outset is that it all starts off with the frog, and there's a well-known midrash where David HaMelech, the sweet singer of Israel, is enchanted by the amazing power of song with which he has been created, and is wondering, is there anybody who sings like me? And then a simple frog who's there stops him and says, well, I'm singing all the time, day and night. The frog with its croaking, warbling, that is its song to God Almighty, and King David was duly humbled. So the frog here, the warbling or the singing frog, is a very powerful image of the idea that is the very center of our teaching, the concept of holy song. And to see how this unfolds, we will go into the teaching in detail, and let us understand a very typical structure of Rabbi Nachman's teachings in Likutey Moharan. Here in particular, this teaching is going to explain to us how all of the concepts in the structure Rabbi Nachman will build are all alluded to in the Agadah of the tale of Rabbi Bar Chana. Before Rabbi Nachman will address the actual symbolism of the Agadah, he will first put before us, stage by stage, a whole binyan, a whole structure of concepts, one of which leads into and implies the other. And only when he has completed that structure will he then address the symbolism in the Agadah and show how each aspect of the structure he built for us is alluded to in the story. And this particular teaching has at its very head the expression Lashon Rabbeinu Zal. This is the actual words of the Rabbi. That is to say, since this teaching was delivered in that town of Ladizin, that was prior to Reb Nosson coming to Reb Nachman, and therefore it was not he that transcribed it, but the phrase in Likutey Moharan at the head of any teaching, Lashon Rabbeinu, indicates that this is actually transcribed from the manuscript of Rabbi Nachman. Reb Nosson himself, who transcribed most of the other discourses of Likutey Moharan, was an assiduous listener and scribe, but Reb Nosson himself ascribes a particular sanctity to the Lashon Rabbeinu, the actual words of the Rebbe. So to embark now on this teaching, Rabbi Nachman says somebody who hears a melody from a menagen, a musician or a singer who is a rasha, that person who hears this will find it hard for him to serve the Creator. Conversely, when he will hear melody from a kosher, a worthy and pure musician and singer, it will be good for the person, as will be explained. Because the sound of song, the sound of melody is drawn from the birds. And this is implicit in the Midrash Rabbah. This is Midrash Rabbah on Leviticus chapter 16, discussing what is actually in diaspora this week's parasha, the purification of the Metzorah leper, where the ritual of his purification involves the priest bringing 2 live birds, one of which is slaughtered into a vessel containing water, and the second bird is dipped into this together with cedar wood and with hyssop, and with this bird, and then the live bird is set free. And the Midrash asks, for what reason is the purification of the leper dependent upon 2 living birds of pure species? Answers the Midrash, Yovo kalanyo v'chaper al kalanyo. Let there come a kalanya to atone for a kalanya. The word kalanya is an Aramaic term rooted in the Hebrew word kol, a voice, and the word kalanya could be translated as a loud mouth, somebody who's always talking loudly. And the bird, on the bird's level, its chirping is considered to be a kalanya. The bird is a chatterer. And it comes to atone for the chatterer, that is to say, the person that became afflicted with tzoras, leprosy, on account of their evil tongue. Matzoy ra, our sages interpret as motzi ra, one who brings forth wickedness from his mouth, and the ritual of purification after the Metzorah has already healed from the manifestations of the plague. With these 2 birds, let the chatterer, the bird that is slaughtered, come to atone for the chattering person. The person was smitten with the plague on account of his voice, his words. Shediber lashon hara, he spoke evil report disparagingly about others. Nimtzo, it comes forth by deduction. Mishu kosher, somebody who is a pure person. Nimsheches anagino sheloi min ashtei tziporim chayes tehorois. In his case, the melody comes forth from 2 living pure birds. Now we shall be expanding on what exactly these birds are as we go on. Because of Bazoyer, the Holy Zohar has it written, Shashtei tziporim anal yonkin mi'asa denevim yonkin. These 2 birds, the purificatory birds of the Metzorah, and the birds from which holy voice derives, these birds are drawing their spiritual influence from that same spiritual nurture point, that place from which the Nevi'im, the prophets, draw their nurture. Rabbi Nachman here is alluding in the tree of the Sfirot to the Sfirot of Netzach and Hod, which sit underneath Tiferet. They are the lower triad of Netzach, Hod, Yesod, sitting underneath the triad of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, and Netzach and Hod are the place from which the Nevi'im are said to draw their inspiration. And says Rabbi Nachman, continuing, Lokach nikro nagein chazon. For that reason, the musician, the cantor, the singer is called hazan. Miloshen hazoin, from the root of the concept of hazon, which is the word for a prophecy, as in the case of the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1, Chazon Yeshayahu, the prophecy, the vision. Hozor is the Hebrew root for perceiving or viewing something, and because the music is drawn from the place of the prophets, that's why the cantor is called the chazan, and this is an expression with a connotation of nevuah, of prophecy. The musician, the cantor, takes his melody from that same spiritual place from which the prophets draw. But if the cantor is a wicked person, he draws his melody from the other birds on the side of unholiness, the husk, the klippah, and it's written in the Zohar that these unholy birds draw from the breasts of the Sphira of Malchut, which in a hidden way gives nourishment also to the unholy forces. And in our next session, we shall carry through this discussion and see how Rabbi Nachman develops this contrast between the holy birds and the unholy birds and the consequences of the different sources of these melodies. So with that, my friend, we conclude our studies for today, and with the help of God, I'll be back on Thursday at 1600 hours Israel time with further study of the prophet Haggai and of our teaching in Likutey Moharan, and I hope that you will enjoy our new format, and keep in mind that with the help of God, next Sunday at 1600 hours Israel time, I will be having the Shavua Tov hookup in order to discuss the weekly portion and coming days of note in the calendar. And with that, my dear friends, I wish you Hemshech Yom Tov, a continuing good day from here in the holy city of Jerusalem.